I started studying with Charlie in the late 1980s. I think it was around 1987. This was after seeing a Jeff Berlin video where at the end of the video there was an ad for Charlie's correspondence courses. You know, thinking back before that time, Charlie used to only teach one-to-one private lessons in his studio in Boston. And when I was at Berkeley in 1980, I remember all the heavy jazz players at the time were studying with Charlie, so his reputation definitely preceded him. So I wrote to him and explained that I wasn't happy with my playing, and he wrote back and he said he could help. This started a 10-year relationship that I had with him through mail correspondence. All the old timers that studied with Charlie will remember that we did this through cassette tape, and this took ages to get our lessons back and forwards, especially because I'm living in the UK. I figured out that I took about 150 lessons from him through a 10-year period. Well, let's just say he kind of turned my whole world upside down. You have to understand that at that time, I was a very successful professional musician in London with 3 solo records to my name, along with hundreds of recording dates as a studio musician, as well as a best-selling author writing bass books. When I started with Charlie, his material just totally kicked my ass, and I literally had to change the way I thought about playing. That part was very humbling for me. I guess the first 6 months was the hardest, but he was really encouraging, man. I mean, you know, if you had the effort, if you put in the effort, he rewarded you. And he always made me feel that I was his only student. I remember one time when I was complaining to him that what we were doing was a bit too hard for me, and I was moaning a bit, and he just said, "Hey, you know, you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto." And that made me laugh and got me back on track. You know, he always had the right thing to say, and, you know, literally there wasn't anything that he didn't know musically. I kid you not, and I've met and hung with everybody. Charlie was a one-off. His lessons are undoubtedly, in my opinion, the greatest contribution in jazz education, full stop. Wow, that's a good question. It's a hard one to answer though, because I've studied so many different concepts with Charlie, and I continue my Charlie lessons to this very day under Gary Dial. But Charlie did teach me a cool concept that is very cross-applicable to a lot of the different things that he taught me, and this is called superimposition. I use this all the time, and this is basically based on playing lines on top of the original chord changes that are based on a different set of chords. The reason it works is because the superimposed chords contain notes from the original chord that are made up from a collection of chord tones and tensions that are resolvable over the original chord. So if we took a D minor 7 chord, for example, you could superimpose, let's say, the notes from a G7 over that, because the root 3, 5 and flat 7 of the G7 is the 11, 13 root and flat 3 over the D minor 7 chord. All these notes are resolvable over D minor, and I can also then employ all the melodic embellishments I want over G7 as long as I resolve the line to a chord tone. I love this system because once you realize how it works, you don't have to think so much in upper structures anymore, because you're just thinking root 3, 5, and 7 of whatever chord you're superimposing. And then there's also a lot of different choices that you can use. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate this concept over one of my original tunes called Alien Nation. And then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about what I was doing using this concept. Okay, so that was an original track of mine called Alien Nation, and if you'd like to check out that track in its entirety, or even perhaps buy that track, you can go to joehubbardbass.bandcamp.com. That's my Bandcamp page. That track features George Whitty on keyboards from the Brecker Brothers and Tom Breckline from Chick Corea, Robin Ford, and Al Di Meola. If we look at where I was really starting with, this is a D minor 7 chord. In the first 4 bars, I was kind of bringing out that G7 idea, trying to emphasize that 13 over the D minor 7. I'm taking a G7 idea right in the beginning. So that really brings out that, that 13 and 11 of the D minor, but really I'm just thinking, the root 3, 5, 7 of the G7. So that 13 is 3 and the 11 is the root. So that kind of helps you to be a little bit more expedient in the way that you're processing these things when you're, layering these things over the different chords. I go into some, like a C major thing, somewhere in that 4-bar phrase, and then kind of go back to like a D minor, like a 2-5 kind of pattern, something like that. Follow it up with, I think, a little rundown was kind of like a C major thing, and that brings me into that next 4 bars. So you can kind of see just within the first 4 bars, I'm kind of thinking that G7 to C major kind of thing, and not forgetting about the D minor 7, it's in there, but it's, it's just, again, those different layers that are coming in and using superimposition as a vehicle or as a launching pad to kind of implement those ideas. When we go into the second 4 bars, I'm really like thinking of developing this kind of motific line by superimposing an E7 sus4. So if I looked at the E7 sus4, this is going to give me E, A, B, and D. Okay, over the D minor 7, that root 4, 5, and flat 7 is going to be the 9, the 5, the 13, and then the root. So if you notice that pattern I play, that kind of is like a cool little repetitive motif using that E7 sus that I am superimposing over the D minor 7 chord. As I kind of play that second part of that second 4 bars, I'm really just taking these little voicings here and really thinking about just playing those different chords down the scale. If you think of that's like an E minor, but I'm playing, it's got the 11 on the top, so like an E minor 11 kind of voicing. Here I've got a D minor 11 voicing. Here I've got a G6. Here I've got an F6 that comes over that. Okay, as I then go into the third 4 bars, here's where I'm kind of borrowing another concept that I learned from Charlie, which is really cool, which he called double mambos, but you've probably heard elsewhere as being called triad pairs. And that's where you take 2 triads that are mutually exclusive. In other words, they don't have any repeated notes, and then there's a lot of different combinations, a very in-depth study that Charlie will take you through. But it's very, very cool. And what I'm doing over this is over this D minor 7, I'm kind of superimposing a G7 sus, but by way of using triad pairs. And that's where I'm taking a G major triad and an F major triad. So again, kind of goes a little bit beyond the scope of this video to get into a complete study of triad pairs. But this is kind of how cool you can do this, where I'm taking, remember I told you in the beginning, this superimposition can be applied, cross-applied to a lot of the different things that Charlie teaches. That's one of the reasons I chose to do it in this very short video. So I'm playing these kind of lines, this kind of long line here, that's all through that. I'm employing that going back and forth between those 2 different triads. So you might want to transcribe that and then analyze that for yourself and see how that works. It's got to be said, and Charlie was really big on this, was that the academic part, and of course this is the academics, and he taught in this way where he would give you the bare bones, the nuts and bolts of the academics of how this worked. But the thing is that you had to really take this and dissect it and pull it apart, stick it under a microscope, and then you had to start to use that as a stepping stone to launch your own creative juices. And that's just a must with this. So we can talk about this stuff all day long, but until you start to really implement this stuff, write out a bunch of solos, until you can start thinking this way when you just sort of casually improvise, then it's then, aside from that, it's just all talk. You know what I mean? So the academics are important, and you get that, like I said, the academics are the stepping stone to the creative part. And that's what you got to really realize to sort of fulfill this whole thing, you know. But anyway, I hope this was helpful, and, you know, try some of these ideas out for yourself. Yes, they are. Charlie's daughter, Barbara, and a former student of Charlie's called Gary Dahl are both teaching Charlie's original curriculum. I've been studying myself with Gary now since 2011. It's all of Charlie's original lessons in his own handwriting. And, you know, what people don't fully realize is that Charlie had written thousands of lessons, even some stuff he never taught to anybody while he was alive. So the tentacles of Charlie's teachings are still very much alive and well through Barbara and Gary. For more information about the correspondence course that they both teach, go to charliebanacos.net.